Welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. My name is Chris Hume, managing editor of the Lancaster Patriot, and I'm joined today by very special guests. First, I have Pastor Joel Saint to my far right, pastor of Independence Reformed Bible Church and the executive director of the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society. Joel, thanks for coming in again.
Always good.
Yeah. And we also have Matt Trewhella, pastor of Mercy Seat Christian Church and the author of The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, very well-known book. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Chris.
Yeah, very, very excited to have you here. And you are here for the conference, the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society conference. What's your topic at that conference?
The Gospel at War with Big Eva.
The Gospel at War with Big Eva. Well, maybe we could touch on that a little bit. This will probably come out after.
There's a funny story about that, Chris, because when we were putting at the Mars board, we were putting it together. The Gospel War with, and I think you have the yellow bus, right?
Yes, I do.
The Gospel War, and so we were assigning topics, right? And we said the Gospel War with Big Eva. Yeah, that sounds like something really good for Matt, right? Matt Trewhella. And so we're like, yeah, I let him know, and I sent him a note, and he did not know what Big Eva was.
No.
And trying to figure it out.
He knows what it is. He doesn't know what the word.
Well, what
the
it was, he
means.
says, "Who's Big Eva?" He says, "I'm sure I'm at war with her, but I just can't figure out who she is."
Yes.
How would you answer that? What is Big Eva, Joel?
Yeah, I tell you, for me, big evangelicalism is the guys with the he's gone now, but Tim Keller would be perfect on this kind of thing. They're in evangelical circles. Here's my qualifications: evangelical circles, big time speakers at conferences, and my third qualification
Matt Trewhella is Big Eva then.
Yeah,
he's evangelical.
Yeah, but I'm going to eliminate. I'm
Okay.
going to eliminate Matt right now. Didn't say anything about the COVID nonsense.
Oh, okay.
If you said anything about the COVID nonsense, if you spoke about how wicked and horrific it was, you are not in Big Eva.
Okay. Yeah, you are out.
You're out,
Pastor Matt.
You're out.
Yeah. So how long have you been this is Mercy Seat Christian Church in Wisconsin?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you been pastoring there?
35 years.
35 years. Almost as long as I've been alive. And it's a Presbyterian church?
Nope, non-denominational.
Okay. Non-denominational. Paedo-Baptist?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, no. Credo Baptist.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I didn't know that. I thought it was Paedo. All right. Well, yeah. So basically, we're glad to have you in here, Matt. It's kind of a last minute thing. Super excited to have you in to talk about anything and everything under the sun as it relates to your work in your ministry, your escapades with your book, a great book that a lot of people have interest in. But I thought we could start out by maybe just talking about, kind of related to that Big Eva topic, just the state of pastors in America today. You two both are pastors, and just, the average pastor, how are they viewing their role? Is it just a job? I don't know. So Matt, why don't we just start with you, just in your interactions, now that you know what Big Eva is, in your interactions with all these pastors in America, I mean, what are some of your concerns with the landscape of pastors in America?
Well, one of the things you have to understand, it's one of the most turnstile professions in America. Pastors come, pastors go. The vast majority of them don't last long, several years, and then they're out of the ministry. And most of them, the biggest fault is they want to be liked. And so they don't want to offend. They don't want to confront the evil, that's for sure. And so what ends up happening is they keep Christianity an inch deep and 5,000 miles wide. That's why 95% of the churches closed down during COVID. I already had a negative view of the state of the church. That it was
Prior to COVID.
It was bad. But I had no idea it was this bad.
Prior to COVID, what were your main concerns? What were your main concerns before COVID?
That everybody just wants to have master appreciation ceremonies every Sunday and not actually do those things which are dear to God's heart, not actually see God's law applied to every area of life.
Okay. Yeah, and you see that then with COVID, right? The kind of the application of that. If that's how you're viewing things, then when you have something come up like COVID, we're not applying God's law anyway, why not just shut her down?
Exactly. And so that's, I immediately went to the law of God, regarding quarantine laws, and preached a sermon about that, and took the Churchmen to task because they were pushing this idea that true Christian love is putting a mask on, sitting 6 feet apart, getting that shot. And I said, no, that isn't how Christians show love. We don't show love by violating the ninth commandment and saying things that aren't true. We don't say, that it's okay to tell lies. We shall not bear false witness.
And they're talking about saying, I have this disease, I'm contagious, I'm going to wear a mask, it's going to protect me. All these lies.
Yeah, and it's like they wanted to do it to be a witness to the world and to show love to the world. I mean, Exodus 22 verse 3 makes it clear, do not join in with those who are spreading a lie. Paul says that in the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, that love rejoices in the truth. It doesn't rejoice in lies. So Christians don't show love to their neighbor by spreading lies and telling lies to people. They actually show love to their neighbor by telling them what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. It's called servant leadership. And the opportunity that us as churchmen had during the whole COVID thing was huge. I told my fellow churchmen, we have the least to lose, the churches. The businessmen have the most to lose because they're already under this phalanx of bureaucracy and regulation and law. And so we can be a benefit to them by standing in interposition. Plus, we show leadership because people see that we're speaking out about these things and not just going along with all the other people who are living the fiction. But unfortunately, we didn't do that. Over 95% of the churches shut down, playing the traitor to Christ, and then most of them played the whore also. Over $12 billion went to Christian churches, organizations, and universities, rewarded by the tyrants themselves for teaching Christian people to go along with the tyranny. Put the mask on, stay 6 feet apart, put slimy stuff on your fingers, and get that shot. Yeah. So it was terrible.
So the feds paid out $12 billion to pastors to get them to influence what they said from the pulpit.
Absolutely, yes.
What was that part of the
PPP money?
That's appalling. What possible rationale could you have for that, Matt?
Yeah, what possible rationale could you have? Here's what I did.
I don't know what to preach this Sunday morning. Oh, there's a check from the government. I wonder if they might have an opinion of what I should say, and I think I'll say it.
Yeah, and what was happening was these Christian legal groups were courting the pastors. I got numerous letters, and the letters were about how you can get this money from the government, and we'll show you how you don't have to pay it back. It's free money. It's all free.
And you were hearing from Christian legal groups on this?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, man.
Well, this is from Christianity Today back in, November 2021. About 40% so when Michigan's governor required churches to stop meeting in person on March 16th last year.
Not that ghastly woman. What's her name?
Gretchen.
Gretchen, yeah.
Kenton Sanders, director of operations at Mars Hill Bible Church, quickly did some worrying math. About 40% of donations to the megachurch in Granville, Michigan came during in-person services that drew some 1,750 adults, students, and children weekly. With in-person services shutting down, donations would surely tumble. On and on it goes. So they applied for help through the Paycheck Protection Program, the emergency loan program created by the CARES Act, a $2.2 trillion relief and stimulus package passed by Congress in March 2022 under Donald Trump.
Yeah,
right.
Trump, yeah.
So that kind of brings us to the point of, these people, these pastors, I hate to even call some of these guys that, it's a business. It's like, well, all right, our bottom line is hurting here, so let's turn to the government. I mean, do many pastors, would I be wrong to say many pastors view it's just a job? You go to school, you get the MDiv, you get the PhD. I mean, there are churches here with 5 pastors with PhDs on staff, and they all shut down. They have so much to lose. And we were talking about this, Joel. I mean, and we could apply this to a lot of different things, not just COVID, but these pastors have so much to lose when it has become a career. I mean, they're going to lose their salary, their retirement, all these things. I mean, would you agree, Matt, that a lot of pastors view it that way?
I don't think it's so much that they view it as a job, as it's the form of Christianity they've been schooled in.
Okay.
And that's what's had the impact upon them, so that they think that while they're having this flurry of religious activity, they're serving God. But they're never doing those things which are dear to his heart. And they certainly don't want to involve themselves in public or civil government matters things dealing with public policy, they have this myopic view of the Word of God, that it's this little sliver of our life, and it's all narcissistic, it's all inward, it's all personal. God's law word has nothing to say to the public realm. That's what their Christianity is. And, they've created slogans to support their form of Christianity to make sure that any upstart Christian who gets involved in public policy or speaking publicly or civil government matters is reined back in.
I heard one of those, Matt, recently from a friend of mine, lives out of state, goes to a respectable church, no doubt, aren't they all? And he said his pastor stood up and said that the mission of the church is limited to preaching the word and administering the sacraments.
Yeah. That's
all. That's it. So, so that'll shut down everything, including I'm pretty sure all 28 chapters of the Book of Acts. Right? Yes. You just wipe the Book of you just whitelisted black whatever however you listed it. The Book of Acts is out.
Yes.
Right? How can you have the Book of Acts with that kind of a view? Right. I don't know how it can be done.
Right. Well, I think I just want to press this point more because I agree with you, Matt, that this is a Christianity that's been taught. But I guess part of that I would say is that so many of these pastors, the career path to becoming a pastor, like Joel, your path was very different. I don't know about your path, Matt. Maybe we could talk about that briefly. But for a lot of these guys, there's a lot of money poured into education from these seminaries, right? The ministerial seminary complex, if you will. Like there's a ton of money poured into that. You go and you get your degrees, but you have to, because if you don't have a degree, you're obviously not qualified to be a pastor, right? Joel, you have a PhD, right?
Oh, yeah.
MDiv?
MDiv, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Those are the qualifications listed in 1 Timothy, right? So you go there, you get all this education from the seminaries. We could talk about them. And then, it's very hard for you to then say, you know what, I'm going to take a stand. Because I think some of them do recognize, even with COVID, I think a lot of them know what they did was wrong. I think when they respond to requests or questions about it, they get defensive. And even with some of the God's law stuff, sometimes they're like, especially if they're Westminster Confession guys, they're like, well, yeah, but if they put themselves out and take a stand, from the man's perspective, they do have a lot to lose because some of these jobs are pretty nice for these big megachurch pastors. So I don't know. I think that's part of it. What would you say to that, Matt? And also just the current seminary system that we have here and what it's producing for us.
Yeah, well, we can see what it's producing for us. Not much. It's not good. The situation's not good. And one of the things I run into regularly too is people are told, well, my minister told me that they can't talk about these matters because of our 501c3, and we could possibly lose our 501c3 status. Okay, well, that's a bunch of garbage. The truth of the matter is I'm a churchman. I know churchmen. 95% of them are silent regarding civil government matters or public policy matters or public matters voluntarily. They're silent. They would be silent whether there was a 501c3 or not.
Yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of 501c3, but that's always pulled out. It says, wait a second, you mean that limits what I can say from the pulpit? I think you're exactly right, Matt. If you to me, it's a little bit like Roe versus Wade. You're constantly hiding behind that, right? Well, I'm pro-life, but I really can't do anything until Roe versus Wade gets reversed. Okay, it got reversed. Now what are you doing? What you did before. Right. If you took away 501c3 right now from all these churches and these churchmen that are saying they can't say anything because they'll lose their status, I think that their message next week, next month, next year would be exactly the same.
Yes. Yeah. And it's important to understand they shouldn't be putting their churches under the jurisdiction of the state to begin with. To me, I read two sentences out of a book. It was a book by Gary DeMar, Ruler of the Nations, and he talked about this. It was literally a 2-sentence paragraph. And he simply said, we should not take the Church of Jesus Christ and place it underneath the jurisdiction of Caesar. Bingo. That made so much sense to me as a young minister. I decided the church I pastor when I begin pastoring will never be a 501c3.
Yeah. And my understanding is in the tax code, which is another mess, but the churches technically already have tax-exempt status, even without the 501c3. But yeah, all that is just...
Which is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Matt, what was your path to ministry? Did you go to a big seminary? How did you get involved in ministry?
Yeah. Well, I was raised in Detroit. Where I grew up, I was a minority. Yeah, sorry. And where I grew up, I was a minority. And so I was involved in a gang, and I used to steal cars, burn down buildings, and, rob people and fight other gangs and deal dope. And I could keep going. Okay. I ended up charged with arson at age 17, and I was tried as an adult. I had already done time in juvenile, but this is my first time being tried as an adult. At 17 on an arson charge, and I was put into teen challenge by the courts.
Wow.
And that's where I came to know Christ. I mean, it was a massively radical transformation. I went into that church, and there was like 1,000 people there, huge place. And where I grew up, was raised in, Christianity was, shh, nobody says anything, very quiet. And I walked into this place, and everybody's sitting around like, wow, talking to each other. And I really felt like they were glad to see me when they were saying it. And we went in and we sat down, and they were all talking like they're getting ready to see a movie. A lady comes out and starts playing the piano, and these people were worshiping God. I mean, they were worshiping him like he really existed. And all of a sudden, I felt odd inside, like I was going to cry. And I sat down in the pew, put my face in my hands, because I didn't want anyone to see that. And I wept for an hour and a half straight. I mean, wept. Not just tears here or there, wept, crying. And what was happening inwardly was, for the first time in my life, I actually felt guilty for all the evil things I had done. God was convicting me of my sin, showing me I was a sinner. And at the same time, I was realizing he was forgiving me. He loves me. I didn't even love myself. I didn't think my mother loved me. And God loves me. And that's why I just sat there I was a radical transformation. I got up from there and I decided to live for him. And it was about 6 months after that I felt the call to the ministry.
You were still 17, 18 years old? Or
18 years old at that time, yes.
Okay.
So I ended up, getting married young. Me and my wife, 2 months after she turned 18, I was 21, and I was doing part-time schooling at Assemblies of God college there in Detroit. And then we decided to finish the last 3 years, and I went out to Valley Forge here in Pennsylvania and did 3 years at Valley Forge and got my degree in the Bachelor of Science in Theology. Had planned on going on to, what's the school right below us? Deerfield or...
Trinity?
Trinity, yeah.
Okay.
In order to get my MDiv.
Okay.
That's when I found out about what was happening to the preborn. Because after I left here, Pennsylvania, and was done at Valley Forge, I took a pastorate as a Christian ed pastor out in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And so I planned on driving down there, getting my MDiv, and all of a sudden God just woke me up, and I saw they're killing people. And I can either continue to devote more of my life to this education thing, or I can take action on behalf of my preborn neighbor. Yeah. And that was really what helped me get out of the mindset of your average Christian pastor, was what took place there, what God did in my heart there.
Yeah. So you never ended up going to get your MDiv?
Never did.
Probably one of the best decisions of your life.
Yeah.
Save your money and your brain.
Yeah. Oh, man. So... All right. Well, we can circle back to that and any other topics. What about your book, the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, and just kind of tying that in with what you've said a few times here, that the pastors are not applying the law of God. They're not speaking to the civil sphere. Where do you think things are at right now? Has there been any change with pastors, in response to your book, or just the current state of pastors in America? There's a big interest in politics now. With the past few years, I think it's grown. So what do you think things are right now?
No, I agree with your estimation. There is more interest and involvement now amongst pastors than there was 3 years ago and before that. But still, there's no run on sackcloth and ashes down at the Ace Hardware. It's a minimal number of men. The vast majority still continue on in their putrid state. But I'll tell you, it is rewarding. I have a stack of letters from churchmen across the country who said, reading your book, this is essentially what they all say, reading your book helped me cross that bridge to see that my Christianity does have something to do with civil government matters. So that's encouraging to hear. And the book has done well. It's sold over 130,000 copies now. And I travel all the time as much as I can because I like being a pastor. And I view the pulpit as the most lethal weapon Christ has given me in what's going on here on the planet, in my little segment of influence. And, like the first 2 weeks of October, I'll be over in Ireland.
Okay.
On a 2-week speaking tour, just presenting the doctrine to the Irish over there. Then I go over to Alaska later in the month, then over to Minnesota, then to South Dakota, and you're just like, and it's encouraging. It's encouraging to meet people all over the place who see the goodness of God's word and that it does speak to every area of life, including the area of civil government matters.
Yeah. Joel, any thoughts?
A few. First of all, there was something that came out of the whole COVID, to go back to that for a moment and to come back, bring it up to speed. But there was something that happened during that. It was outrageous. It was offensive. It still is outrageous and still offensive what happened. But there was one thing where I kind of like agreed with everybody, which was kind of an amazing thing. Because what happened was here in Pennsylvania, our governor said, well, only essential businesses can stay, essential businesses, services can stay open if you're essential. And it turns out that his extended family has a cabinet business. And while other businesses had to shut down because they weren't essential, turns out his family cabinet business was essential, and they got to stay open, of course. But what happened was, at least for me, the churches shut down, and the government had said, well, you should shut down if you're non-essential. And so the government said the church is non-essential. The churchmen said the church was non-essential. And son of a gun, if I didn't agree with both of them. I mean, if you could close down that easily, you really are non-essential.
Yes.
So it was that was like the light going on there, just a tiny little bit. There was another thing, and Chris and Matt, I don't know if I would have thought this through at the beginning of it. Partway through the whole COVID nonsense, it became clear to me that I don't even have, the pastors, right? The pastor, right? The shepherd makes a statement that we're no longer going to be a flock, right? I mean, isn't that what it was? We're not going to meet anymore. We're not a flock anymore. Mm-hmm. And I realized, maybe it was through the back door, that I had no authority to do that. If I am a shepherd, what do I get to stand up and say we're not a flock anymore? And pastors will constantly say, not my flock. This belongs to Jesus, right? Well, then how are you shutting it down and calling it not a flock anymore? Mm-hmm. You're not Jesus, right? You are a shepherd. And another thing just became clear to me, and I began to think about the whole hireling thing from John 10. And it was kind of scary because, Christ says the hireling sees the wolf coming and he flees. And I realized that if you're not paying attention in your church, you don't know if you have a hireling or not until the wolf shows up. Mm-hmm. Because up until the time the wolf shows up, he's glad handing everybody, right? Greatest guy ever. Here's the wolf, and he's headed for the tall grass. Mm-hmm. Well, the wolf showed up, and we found out who the hirelings were. Yeah, and it's shameful.
Great insight.
Yeah. Well, let's if we're ready, I want to go back to your book. All right, the Doctrine of the Lesser. So the full title is The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates: A Proper Resistance to Tyranny and a Repudiation of Unlimited Obedience to Civil Government. Matt, if you could just try to summarize maybe some of the main points there and the practical application that we need to see in America, especially as it relates to biblical law, in moving in the right direction. I mean, what are some practical things that you would hope, and maybe you've seen already, that would come about with the ideas in your book being applied?
Yeah, it's caused a political firestorm for people's political paradigms. The book has.
Okay. Why?
Because they're all sitting around waiting for the next presidential election to get the next Supreme Court justices appointed. And yeah, if you actually look at how much power the president has in the Constitution, it's pitiful. It's like, why would I even want to run for that position? That's how little the power is. But of course, the two political parties and the media want to make the presidency into an emperorship, and they put everybody's focus on the presidential election and federal campaigns. And
can
the truth
I
of the
speak
matter,
to that just a little bit here? Executive director of the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society, and of course, that whole election steal thing happened in 2020 and so forth. But I still remember going to one of our meetings in like 2021, and I made an announcement to the other guys that things are about to be fixed. I saw a Trump 2024 sign out, and I just knew that we were on our way to fixing everything.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the book shows people you don't have to continue to wait for the next presidential election and the next Supreme Court justices. You're able to stop the evil now, and that's actually the duty of the lesser magistrates. The doctrine for your listeners is simply that when the higher-ranking civil authority makes unjust or immoral law, policy, or court opinion, the God-given right and duty of the lesser authorities is not to obey, and if necessary, to actively resist the superior authority. I always use a quote from Emperor Trajan, who's actually a higher magistrate. He summed up the doctrine real well. He was giving a sword to one of his subordinates. He said, "Use this sword against my enemies if I give righteous commands. But if I give unrighteous commands, use it against me." So that's the doctrine in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And people immediately grab onto this. And it's been amazing how much fruit, actual practical application. We documented over 500 acts of interposition during the COVID thing, almost all by county and local officials, sheriffs, county boards, mayors, city councils, village councils, either opposing their state government or opposing the federal government itself.
Okay. Any other examples other than COVID where you've seen this applied?
Oh, yeah. Like right now, you have the sheriff in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, defying the governor. She wants to
That's a Democrat. Isn't that a Democrat sheriff, too?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're fighting amongst themselves now.
Yeah.
But you have the same thing up in Illinois, just below where I live. You have over 90 sheriffs standing in defiance of the governor.
Pritzker, right?
Pritzker,
Yeah.
he's a dog. And you have...
That's a nice word that first. I don't have to edit it out.
Yes. And over 90 sheriffs saying no to him and to the state legislature because of their assault weapon ban, which is a clear infringement upon the Second Amendment rights of the citizens. So yeah, we see it in numerous areas, this matter of interposition, where the civil authority, the lower authority, stands between the tyrant superior authority and those who they represent in their jurisdiction.
So I have something I want to ask you and get really into the nitty gritty here, because the doctrine of when a command or law or mandate is unjust, immoral, and I forget the third thing you said, but when it's unjust and immoral, the lesser magistrate has a duty to resist it, to nullify it. What's the ultimate standard then for defining what is just and moral?
Yes.
And if it's not the Bible, what is it? And this is one of my concerns with, and one of the discussions we have here often is the American system. At the end of the day, it seems that the current system, the highest law of the land is whatever we the people say. And if that's the highest standard, then how are we judging what is just? So unless we have God's law, how can you have a lesser magistrate even know what he should oppose?
Right, and that's extremely important question. I have a chapter on the objective standard as the law of God within my book. And I have a lot of libertarian friends who really like my book, but they hate that chapter. And I always say to them, well, if you remove that chapter, the whole doctrine kind of collapses in on itself because it's the linchpin of the doctrine. If divine law, God's law, is not the objective standard to which all men and all governments of men are accountable, if God's law is not the objective standard so that we know what is right, what is wrong, what is just, what is unjust, what is good, what is evil, then who or what is? You? Me? The Supreme Court?
Congress?
Congress, exactly. And so all of Western man for well over 1,500 years viewed God's law as revealed in Scripture as the higher law to which all men and governments of men were accountable. If a law was made contrary to God's law, it was viewed as no law at all and was to be resisted. It didn't mean things were perfect, because anything man's involved in never is perfect.
Right.
But what it did mean was that when the governments of men abused their authority, there was this objective standard, God's law, by which other men could call men to repentance, to repair, and to reform. And now, because that objective standard's been removed, because God's law has been thrown under the bus, not only by the state, but by the church,
Right.
now the state is free to make law out of thin air. And as you can see, they've now made good evil,
Right.
evil good, and did you notice you're living in an insane asylum?
Would you agree with me that though there was a lot of Christian heritage in America, no question about it, the Enlightenment thinking had influenced the Constitution to the degree that it certainly does not acknowledge the law of God as the ultimate standard, and it leaves it in the people. John Locke said the supreme power to make law. And so would you agree that even though there's a lot of Christian things we can look at with the Constitution, at its core, it does not acknowledge the law of God as the supreme law of the land?
Right. Now, that's my reading of history, too. I've read a lot during that era. And, the Enlightenment has a good side and has a bad side. The good side believes in limited government and virtues. The bad side believes in unlimited government, socialism, status, leviathan hells, and decadence and immorality.
Right.
And the Christians and the good side of the Enlightenment clearly joined up together in their opposition against Britain and against the mindset of the bad Enlightenment people. And so that's always been around in our country, this kind of mixture that you're talking about, where you can see the elements of both within our founding documents and also within, the statues and edifices and things that you see from back in that era.
So what about, I've talked to, I guess they were township supervisors here in Lancaster County, and I think Dave and I were talking with them, and just trying to get them to maybe nullify some of this stuff. And I get it would be extreme to them, but it has to do with, I think it was property taxation and all these things. There are things, those are man-made laws, came from the Constitution. I mean, I think you can look at it and even say that it's inconsistent that we would have those things. Even Madison, who I disagree with on a lot of things, property is supposed to be your right and even your money. But in any case, if we look at it biblically, I would argue, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, that the government shouldn't be able to take your money from you by force. And we could even just focus on property tax if we want to keep it more simple. And these guys say, well, if we oppose this, if we don't force the collection of this, because I think the county has to collect some of this stuff for the state and whatever, even other taxes, they're going to sue us. They're going to come after us. And so at the end of the day, these guys are like, yeah, this is nice, because they were like, yeah, we agree. The government's too big. It's grown to this huge thing. I mean, these are Republican guys, and they're like, yeah, but we can't do anything. We're the township supervisors. I mean, if we don't follow what they want us to do and get the money for them that they need, they're going to sue us and we're going to lose. So what do you say to that? And how do we get to that point where, is that something we should be fighting for? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the law of God on any of these matters and see what it has to say in order to work out our worldview and how these things should be handled. And, there's principles also from the law of God that are applicable in different situations depending on what the topic is that you're talking about. But the number one thing I've found is, even on an issue like taxation, they won't even take action on something way more important like the murder of the preborn. They won't even...
Agreed.
And so this is my experiences. Cowardice is our biggest opponent when it comes to the magistrates, because you can show them historically, biblically, and you can show them practically, legally, that they can take a stand, and they still won't, even after they acknowledge that doing so would, is proper in all three of those segments. They still won't. Why? Because of fear, the fear of man, cowardice. So when you find a magistrate is willing to take a stand, you always want to rally to that person, and you want to build in them. And because they're rare. They're not falling off trees.
Right.
I hope that helps a little bit with that.
Yeah. Joel, anything you want to add to that? I have a few more questions, but
Yeah, the only thing I would ask, perhaps this question, we're talking about the magistrates. One of the things that I'm convinced of is that the magistrates or the civil authorities are doing absolutely nothing that the pulpit has already either given them permission to do or outright approved of.
Yep.
And so my question, maybe both of you gentlemen, would be something like this. What would it look like if the pastors actually stood up? Would that have an actual influence on the civil magistrate? If the pastors ever, because we hear this all the time, well, what do you want us to do, right? Mm-hmm. I know what I want you to do. I want you to start preaching the whole counsel of God. That's what I want you to do. Because I've seen the Barna, and maybe you've seen it too, the Barna research, George Barna research, saying that 90% of the pastors that are questioned about what the Bible has to say to the civil sphere, 90% of them say they know that it speaks to the civil sphere, but they're simply not going to do it.
Yep.
I'm asking for what a picture would look like if the pastors, the existing pastors now, actually said, you know what? Here's what the Bible says happens to people who shed innocent blood. They will be destroyed. We know, for example, that Judah was destroyed even after the reforms of Josiah. That God said in 2 Kings 24, he said specifically that the reason why they got carried off was because of what Manasseh did, and he identified innocent blood as the reason, and he named Manasseh in 2 Kings 24. What would it look like if the pastors actually preached? And I get it. I mean, you have the position that we preach the whole counsel of God. But the research by Barna says, no, we don't. We don't. There's certain stuff that we're staying away from, even though we know the Bible teaches it. Just a real quick story. I have a friend who's who at that time was a pastor in a well-known Protestant denomination. And we were talking one day, and I asked him, I said, do you, and I was not even a pastor at the time, and I asked him, I said, do you preach politics from the pulpit? Oh, no. I mean, you might, it was almost like I cursed or something, right? Oh, no, I never do that. I said, well, why not? I just can't do that. Well, I said, well, the Bible speaks to the political sphere, right? And son of a gun if he doesn't say, yeah, but I'm not going to preach republicanism. So, well, I asked you to preach the Bible, not republicanism. Amen. But I mean, this is a pastor, a seminary grad, who'd been in the pulpit for like 10 years, and he thinks if he preaches what the Bible has to say about politics, that he's like republicanism, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. It definitely wouldn't be republicanism.
It definitely is not. Republicanism is democratism 5 years
right.
5 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah, 5 years ago. Yeah,
5 years ago. Yeah, the other way. What would it look like?
No, I'm with you 1,000% on that. Your point is well taken regarding the pastors. And I always tell people when I work from where we are, the decadence, the debauchery of our country, the lawlessness, and I work my way back to figure out what is the source of this all. I always end up at the pulpits. It's because of the failure of the pulpits to give the whole counsel of God's word, to declare the truth of his words to the people and to the magistrates. And we are reaping the whirlwind right now of this indifference towards civil government or public policy matters by Christian people. It's been going on for well over 100 years now. And, since Christian men have left the realm of civil government, wicked men have come in and filled the void, and they've made their worldview law, policy, and court opinion. And as you can see, it's not going good. And God's word, again, speaks to every area of life, including civil government matters, including morality. And so we should speak to those things as churchmen.
Yeah, and I want to go back there. I want to keep going to the practical level, especially as it relates to these ideas in your book, because yes, we have wicked men ruling. What would it look like if we have Christian men? I know that's one of the points of one of the main questions Luke, your son, Luke Saint, asks in his book. What would it look like if we had a Christian government? And so I want to come back to this question again on property tax. I know abortion is a big one, and we could definitely touch on that. But I want to go back to this issue. Like, okay, what difference does it make? The pastors aren't preaching the Bible. They're not teaching the law of God. They're not saying how it applies to the civil realm. Well, here's something that they should be saying, right? That the government shouldn't be educating the children and funding that via forced taxation, and especially property taxation. Yes. So there's something that I think we could even get a lot of reform guys to agree with on that. You know, they might not agree with me on everything with taxation, but let's start there and say, okay, the government should not be taking taxing our property. We don't even own our land anymore. So this is where, like, if we had a lesser magistrate, like a county commissioner, township, because I'm not sure the details, but in there is where you have the collection of property taxation.
Yeah.
So if those men would be like, we are not going to collect this money, I mean, and I think they would then have the state come down on them, because it's the state's responsibility, according to the PA Constitution, to provide for the education of the children in the state, which again is another, I would say,
always worrisome, right? Pennsylvania's children, like,
right,
yeah,
right.
Orwellian term,
which
yeah.
I think violates
the children of Pennsylvania,
violates God's word, God's law, but it's in the PA Constitution, and again goes to the previous question: what's the highest standard? But so there's something where I think, okay, what could this practically look like, or what would be something that you could stand up against? And I think if we don't talk about specific examples, it can just be kind of like, well, it'd be great if we had Christian rulers, but what would that mean? And I think there's one thing that you say, we are not going to take this money. I mean, now you're not funding I could see that happening at a very small level, and that's how that's the idea. Like, it has to be at a small level, whether it's a township or a small county somewhere, where they say, you know what, we're not going to fund the public schools anymore. I mean, that could lead to something. Do you think that could be an application from your book, Matt?
Yeah. And one of the things you have to do, and you mentioned the Pennsylvania Constitution. I'm not familiar with how your government works here. I know you got boroughs and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so it's a little different than, and even where there's counties, there's vast differences of the authority that county officials possess, municipal officials, I'm sure borough officials. And so you have to determine what authority do they possess. But this is something that is definitely, it comes from the Word of God. Like if people go to mercyseat.net, that's the website of the church where I pastor, and click on the articles or the pamphlet button, I have an article about property tax, condemning it from God's Word, that there should be no property tax. And this goes back to Joel's point. The pulpits have to be saying these things. This has to be thought, getting into the minds of the people and the magistrates in order to begin to bring those changes about within society. Again, the churchmen and the pulpits are massively important to that end.
Well, you know, to echo your point, it's funny. I had the exact same experience that you're talking about when our children were growing up. We'd have these talks about what's going on in society, how the horrific destruction, for example, of the unborn, and the homosexuality and the perversion of God's rules and His laws concerning marriage and family and so forth. And you know, again with homeschool, you know how it is. You get into these discussions with the kids, right? And it was the same thing every time. We would talk about it, ring it out, and it would always come back to every time the churchmen have either approved or given permission.
Yes,
every time. And you know, and it's a little frustrating because they, well, why don't the civil magistrates do the right thing? But a more basic question is, why don't the pastors do the right thing?
They know they're not going to be supported by the pastors.
They're not. They're going to be sold out by the pastors.
Yes. Yep. One of the things I get when I meet with magistrates is, you're a pastor and you're meeting with me. Like, where are all you Christians? That's a common thing said to me. You know, like, they'll tell me the wicked people are lined up at my door all day long. And where are you guys? Yeah. So your point is spot on that.
Yeah, well, I went to your website and the Bible and property tax. I just want to read this. Imagine this. Imagine an America in which there are no homeowners, just serfs. No one owns a home or land. They simply pay a feudal lord a special fee in order to remain on the land or in their home. They must maintain the land and home they live in, or the feudal lord can fine, imprison, or evict them. They must obtain permission from the feudal lord to build onto their home or make significant improvements. Once they have built or improved their home, they must pay the feudal lord an increased special fee in order to remain in their home. The feudal lord can also send his agents to inspect the home whenever he wishes, and the homeowner, the serf, must grant them entry. Did you write that?
Yes.
Okay. Very well written. Yeah, and that's what we have in America. So, again, to a practical level, the pastor should be preaching that to begin with.
Yes.
The pastor should be applying the law of God, and property taxation. I mean, it's kind of a low-hanging fruit for a lot of people. I think it needs to go further, but okay, there it is. And that's what my concern is. I hope, there's a representative in the area that's taken an interest in your book. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with this? Because for so many people, it's just these ideas. Like, yeah, it's a great idea.
Almost a placebo. I got the book, and it makes me feel really good, and I'm still as sick as I ever was.
Well, it's kind of how a lot of people treat the Bible. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it's like, hey, yeah, I believe in the Bible, and that that gives me comfort, but you don't apply it.
Yep.
So that's just and so I'm trying to. So it's really great to have you in here and say, hey, yeah, that could be an area where you could have local guys who should say, no, we're going to stand up to this property taxation. And there are other areas, right? And any other major ones? I mean, we could touch on abortion, but anything else, Matt? Because I really like practical application. Yeah. Like this would be an area that if you had a county commissioner in front of you or a state legislature, I mean, I don't even know why we shouldn't even have those guys just making man-made laws. But what's something practical where we could say, you know what? You should nullify, because really most of this is nullification, right? It's not even, let's put something else in. It's like, this is wicked. And if we just did that for the next 100 years and started getting rid of stuff, we'd be in a way better place 100 years from now. So anything else practically at the county or state level?
Well, one of the banes of man is that I learned over my lifetime is he loves theory, he hates application. Right. And so many men running for office or who are already in office, and they make their claim to fame on limited government.
Right.
As soon as I bring up the doctrine of Lesser Magistrate, crickets. They don't want to hear anything about that. To give you something practical to do, I've told people for 15 years, forget about federal government matters. They are the enemy of the people. They are at war with the American people. Put your time in state, county, and local government. Nobody would do it. They stay transfixed on that presidential thing. The majority are still transfixed on that presidential thing. But more and more people are, and this all started with the pandemic and then with the steel. By the way, I'm from Wisconsin. Pennsylvania. We were in the same boat on that whole steel. And since then, I'm not kidding you, I have watched from coast to coast, people have flooded into county and local government in order to make a stand for freedom, because they realize not only is their federal government out to have war with them, it's run by a regime, but they also learn that their state officials are tyrants too. In fact, the people learn there's many local tyrants.
Right.
And so many boards, county boards, municipal boards, offices within county and local government have been changed out by patriots, by people who love Christ and love their neighbor and want to do right. And they understand that this is a form of ministry. Even God says of the magistrates in Romans 13 that they are his ministers. So here's 4 things, right? Go to your county board and introduce one of 4 things, and you will learn the heart of every person sitting on that board. One is a constitutional county. Make it a resolution that any agent or agency that does anything outside the confines of the U.S. Constitution or our state constitution, we view that null and void and of no authority here in our county. Wow, doesn't carry the weight of law, but what a statement that resolution is. And again, what an opportunity to educate people in true federalism, because that's what our founders established, was a true federalism. They gave us multiple levels of government, multiple branches on each level. Why? because they held to a biblical view of the nature of man, that he's wicked and in need of a savior, namely Jesus Christ. They didn't want power in one man. They were throwing off a monarchy. They didn't want it in a small group of men like an oligarchy like SCOTUS has become. They wanted multiple levels, multiple branches, so that if any one branch or branches began to play the tyrant, another branch or branches would check them. Extremely important. Another thing you can do is a Second Amendment resolution or ordinance. This is extremely important. Little Newton County over in Missouri, when Biden took office, threatening to infringe upon our Second Amendment rights. In order to respond to his lawlessness, they gathered their county board together. This is back in February of 2021. And they made a law which states three things. Number one, any law or policy that infringes upon the Second Amendment rights of citizens in Newton County is null, void, and of no authority in Newton County. Number two, it declares that any county official who aids and abets federal or state agents in infringing upon the Second Amendment rights of their citizens shall immediately be fired or removed from office. And number three, it instructs their sheriff to arrest any federal agents or state agents who come into their county to infringe upon their Second Amendment rights of their citizens. Okay? Bring that as an ordinance, or bring it as a resolution of sorts. Another one is...
Like here in Lancaster County, where Reuben King had the ATF agents and the Pennsylvania State Troopers come in and confiscate 600 of his weapons.
Wow.
For selling them without a federal license, even though you don't need a federal license to sell firearms. So that's an example.
Yeah.
Our sheriff is nowhere to be found
Yes.
when this happens. And coming in for Amos Miller and all his selling his organic meat. So anyway,
Yeah.
Number three.
Number three would be medical freedom resolution. There'll be no masking. There'll be no shot getting, both by government or business. And I have a whole thing where I go into business. So every business has got their hand in the government till. And men fought and bled and died for the freedoms we have. And you have to understand that the government, what they aren't being able to get through civil government, they're trying to achieve through corporations. Mm-hmm. That's how they do it. And many of the prophets, when you read the Old Testament, address both the politicians and the businessmen. Why? Because they were often in cahoots together to bring evil in the land. So that's why I say it has to be directed both at government and business regarding the medical freedom. And the fourth one is a sanctuary county resolution or ordinance. No preborn babies will be murdered here, period. No killing will go on in our fields. And that's it. Will you bring any one of those four? You will know exactly where everyone on that board sits, and you'll know exactly who you need to remove and replace with people who love God, fear Him, and love their neighbor.
Yeah, and I will say with those four, I mean, the first three, all three of those are simply nullifying laws.
Yeah.
Right, which goes to our point that we talk about often, Joel, is that what man-made law do we need? Right, and if those are and then the last one is actually applying God's law, mm-hmm. right? That thou shalt not, you shall not murder.
Yeah.
So it goes to the fact that what we have here is the status problem of man-made law, and what you're saying in your book, we need to nullify it. I mean, even if we don't get to the point yet where we're saying, hey, well, we need to apply this, but we need to start nullifying all these man-made laws. I mean, I would take some issue maybe with the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution. I think there are things in there that violate God's law. And so then if that's the only thing that your standard is, then we can still have this. But to your point, these three things would at least say, we are not going to enforce these man-made laws. We're taking a stand there. And that goes to the fact that these man-made laws are useless.
Yeah, and look where we're at now. I always point this out when I'm out at the universities talking to young people, because they are so ignorant of history and they don't understand the status hell that they live in. And I tell them, look, if you actually go and look at all the laws that our federal government, for example, had, 200 years ago, or let's go back to England, 500 years ago, common law. You could fit all the books dealing with statutes on this table we're sitting around right now. Go into the federal government courthouse in Milwaukee, go into where their room is for the statutes. The room is huge, and it's filled with volume after volume. You don't even know you're breaking the law 90% of the time that you're breaking the law, because there's so many laws to break, and they get to pick and choose who they want to prosecute regarding those laws.
Yeah. Well, there was one bingo square for Luke's huge.
Yeah.
You heard about your bingo sheet, right?
Yes, I heard about
Is there going to be one this year?
Luke's going to be filling it out, I'm quite sure.
Okay. I hope I get one. Yeah, you're definitely right about that. And I argue that we've seen this growth of law because even looking back at American history in the beginning, they slowly started to get away from biblical law, and you add a law, and you add a law, and you add a law, and I think that's at the root of this, that we've abandoned biblical law and we've created all these laws. So, yeah, we need to start nullifying them. Can we start there? Can we start saying, you know what, not here, not in this county, we're not going to enforce that law? And we could add on there property taxation. Number 5, don't enforce it. I don't know. That could cause a stir, but you need courage at the end of the day, right?
Amen.
Like even the framers, even though I would disagree with a lot of their Enlightenment philosophy, they had this. They were willing to die for their stand on unlimited government, and these county commissioners, these township guys, they're not willing to do that.
Yeah.
The amount of taxation. And I think, again, this is part of the flaw. Right after the American War for Independence, you start having this taxation, whiskey tax, all this stuff. But still, let's just say that the level of taxation now would be the envy of King George, right? Like the amount of taxation that we have in America, it's coming to our own people, though, at least not a king overseas, right? But the framers were willing to die. They knew that if it didn't work out, they could be killed.
Yeah.
And our local people are not willing to take that stand against the state government or the federal government. And until they do, I don't think we're going to see much any of these things.
Yeah.
Even those 4. Like, we're not going to see it if they're not willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to die for this, actually. If that's what if you're going to come but maybe it's going to take a lot more because God's still blessing us, even though it's like this weird situation. We're under judgment, but we still have all this prosperity. And I guess it's actually turning out to be a curse because now we're clinging to that. If we lost that, then we might say, you know what, I'm willing to make a sacrifice.
Yeah, no, we need men who, like William Wallace when he's asked, where are you going? To pick a fight. We need men who want to fight. And we should be thankful for these lesser authorities that were pillared within our form of government. Because, you look at Ezekiel 22, God appealed to the princes who were the lesser magistrates for some one of them to stand in the gap against the evil that was in the land. Couldn't find one. So his judgment, I should say, came upon the land, showing that their interposition can actually abate the just judgment of God. That's how sacred and important their duty is in the sight of God. I'm going over to Ireland. They've pretty much removed all of their lesser authorities. I'm going up to Alaska. They've removed almost all of their lesser authorities.
What do you mean, like their county?
Yeah, like no counties, no...
in Alaska?
In Alaska, yeah.
Shouldn't be any people there to start with.
So, anyway.
And Ireland, too, kind of similar thing.
Yeah, they've been removing it all because they've been moving to these matrix forms of government, that are run by people totally unaccountable to the people.
But to your point, I mean, most Americans don't even care about the local level. So if it happens here, they'll be like, whatever, I'm still focused on the federal thing.
Yep.
And they don't realize what... You at least you should have had a layer there. Now, whether or not they're doing anything, I think is the point of your book. Like, they need to do something, but at least they're there. You can appeal to them.
Yes.
And you can pray that God would change them. Like the proverb says, I think with much, I'm going to paraphrase this, with much patience, a ruler can be convinced, right? You have an opportunity there, like you do, Joel, almost every week going to the county commissioners. Mm-hmm. Well, if they'll ever listen is another story, but if they're gone, you don't even have that layer anymore.
Yeah. And I always say, you'll be amazed at how quickly people will start listening to you when things go south.
Right.
I saw that to a certain degree with COVID.
Right.
Suddenly, wow, people actually had an interest in the things I have to say.
Yeah. When did you write your book?
I wrote the book in 2013.
Okay, and you'd say there was a big boost of interest during COVID.
Oh, huge. Yeah, Luis, I had sold about, between 2013 and 2019, I had sold about 40,000.
Okay.
And so since then, the last 3 years, I've sold another 90,000.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a big
time.
boost in the interest. And so that's the goodness of God's judgment. I always tell people the best thing we have going for us are the tyrants themselves. They can't help themselves. And that's what gets people involved. And as soon as the tyrants back off, unfortunately, what do most people do? What have they done now? Many of them have gone back to their food and drink.
Right.
and have become disinvolved because they think, oh, the tyranny's over. Meanwhile, the tyrants are busy continuing to build the infrastructure of their tyranny.
Right.
And they will unleash hell upon this nation as soon as they have opportunity to do so. And that's, again, like Joel said, we'll see who's the hirelings when the wolf is at the door.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things, too, with the whole COVID thing that I've often said, that these it was revealed who these hirelings were. But now that everything's over, the people just went back to those pastors.
They did.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's kind of like the same thing with, okay, now that everything's over, no big deal about the government. We'll just keep, doing the bread and circuses until the next time. Joel, anything else you want to add?
Speaking of interposition, you have an odd thing happen in Jeremiah 26. Jeremiah is told once again, I'm so intrigued with this, he's told once again to go down to the house of the Lord, go down to the temple and prophesy. And he prophesies about justice, which we would think normally would have to do with the civil magistrate. But he's down at the temple where we all know what they're saying. Hey, Jeremiah, you're not welcome here. We already got this, right? We don't need that. But if you read Jeremiah 26, it's intriguing because it's the churchmen that want to put him to death. And it's the civil magistrates that actually step in and save his life.
Yes.
So you see the horrible situation there in, Judah, basically, where he was. No wonder, you're in bad shape when it's the civil magistrates who are actually better than the pastors. That was the case there. I wonder what is our case here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Matt, any final words you'd like to share with our listeners about your book, about current state of affairs, about the next crisis that the government's going to roll out here?
No. You can check out our website at defytyrants.com.
Okay.
defytyrants.com. We have a Rumble channel and a YouTube channel called Defy Tyrants. And we put up little videos, and they're 1 minute, several minutes long.
Okay.
If you're interested in the sermons that I preach, you can go to sermonaudio.com. Just put in my name, Trewhella, Trewhella. I'm the only Trewhella out of 30-some thousand speakers there.
Wow.
And also, you can see the sermons at YouTube. We have Mercy Seat Christian Church.
Haven't taken you down yet.
Oh, I was thrown off for months during the whole COVID thing, and also I preached a sermon regarding what happened on January 6th, and I was thrown off for 2 months for that too. So that's why we've been building at Rumble. At Rumble, we're called Mercy Seat, if people are interested in the sermons.
Okay. Yeah, check that out, and check out Matt's book, The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate, a proper resistance to tyranny and a repudiation of unlimited obedience to civil government. I think you can probably get that pretty much where books are sold online. I see it here. It's on Christian Book. I'm sure it's on Amazon.
Yep.
So get a copy of that. And well, thank you so much for coming in.
Hey, thank you.
I really, really enjoyed it. We definitely need to talk about these things and make some application to our counties, to our states. We need to start nullifying these wicked laws. Joel, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Always lots, but no,
okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me as well. For more information about Joel, you can go to irbc.church, and also you could search him on Sermon Audio. Are you the only saint?
I am.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. There's some Saint whatever, Saint Clair or whatever, but I'm the only saint that at least I was last time I checked.
The name Trewhella, what is that? Where's that?
It's a Cornish name.
Okay.
Any name that usually begins with TRE is Cornish background.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, again, go to defytyrants.com, and you can get more information on what Matt is doing. Also, a lot, we didn't talk too much about it, but abortion, we mentioned it a few times, but there's a lot of stuff on there, I'm sure, about that, and applying the law of God to that realm. Well, again, thank you both for coming in. For more information about the Lancaster Patriot, go to thelancasterpatriot.com. If you'd like to support our show, go to patreon.com/the Lancaster Patriot and become a patron, and you will get access to some bonus content that no one else gets. So thanks for listening. Until next time, remember, Christ, not man, is king. So long.